Hello, everyone. This is Volts for November 12th, 2025. How to make a market for distributed energy flexibility. I'm your host, David Roberts. The great thing about distributed energy is that there is a lot of it. It's not just solar panels, batteries, and EVs. Furnaces, hot water heaters, HVAC systems, stoves, any small-scale energy use can theoretically be managed to the grid's benefit, and thus counts as distributed energy. If you add all that up, the amounts are gargantuan. The problem with distributed energy is that it is distributed. Controlling my EV charger doesn't do the grid much good. To have any real impact, someone needs to control tens of thousands of EV chargers. So, who signs up those tens of thousands of EV charger owners to this program? Who pays them? Who coordinates their chargers? Who determines where and when demand shifting should take place? How is its value determined? Scattered and inconsistent answers to these questions have limited the growth of the distributed energy market and the grid flexibility it could bring. And Lord knows we need flexible grid capacity these days. A company called Piclo is taking aim directly at this coordination problem, working to reduce frictions between what they call flex sellers and flex buyers. It sets up distributed energy resource markets, DER markets, where those with DERs to offer, from individuals to businesses to aggregators, can sign up, get vetted and qualified, and make deals directly with DER buyers, like utilities, system operators, and data centers. The aim is to standardize basic market parameters to enable easier participation and rapid scale-up. Piclo started off in the UK in 2013, gained real momentum and geographic reach in the 2020s. It launched a nationwide market in the US in March of this year, and by September, had market participants, including more than 350 utility buyers across all 50 states. Today, I'm going to talk with co-founder and CEO James Johnston about how the market works, who can participate, and what sort of scale might be possible given enough market standardization. With no further ado, James Johnston, welcome to Volts. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
I'm super geeked about this, James. I was just telling a friend the other day, there's been a few times in my career, not a ton of times, where someone has told me the sort of two-line elevator pitch for what they're doing. And I just immediately think, yes, of course someone's doing this. Why was no one doing this already? This is an idea whose time has come. And I definitely thought that when we talked briefly in Berkeley last year, like you said, I'm setting up a market for distributed energy. And immediately I was like, yes, yes, why has no one done this? So before we jump into that, talk a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve with Piclo. What is the problem with current DER markets, utility markets? What problems are you solving with Piclo?
That's a great question. The fundamental challenge is the traditional way that utilities and ISOs have set up their markets is in a bilateral structure. Now, that works fine if you're a large utility and you have purchasing power, DER aggregators are interested in participating in a particular program, but there are hundreds of utilities across the US. It's a hugely fragmented market. We've already mapped over 400 programs or markets across the US, each slight variation on a theme, slight different approach, different contract terms, different technology focus points. If you don't have a level of standardization here, it creates a huge barrier for entry. And more than that, if you have such a fragmented market, you can't really call it a market in itself,
Yeah.
because how do you value this? How do you compare, where's the most valuable place to go? How do you compare apples and oranges? And what we're really trying to do is bring all of this fragmentation together into a single place. In pretty much every other sector, online marketplaces and platforms have played a huge role in democratizing access, scaling up, participation and delivering outcomes. And really, this is now the time for the energy flexibility sector.
I kept thinking about eBay for some reason when I was thinking about you, just the enormous, like eBay having that platform unlocked sort of retail opportunities for hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, probably millions at this point, who otherwise like had stuff to sell, but didn't know where the buyers were, didn't know how much their stuff was worth, etc. And so just that platform unlocked an enormous amount of sort of trade. I feel like this is kind of a similar model. Or like, as you say, you could cite any number of online marketplaces. And this is why when you told me what you're doing, I was like, yeah, it's crazy. There's not one of these for distributed energy already. It's crazy that if you have distributed energy, you just have to wander out into this wilderness, of 400 utility programs and read about each one individually. It's just right now, the fragmentation is madness.
Well, David, first off, I'm glad you said eBay and you didn't jump straight to dating website, because we've had that comparison, and whilst it's nice, I think we're beyond that. So thank you. Anyway,
yeah, eBay's got a more innocent vibe. Grandmas are selling their beads or whatever. Tinder brings up unpleasant associations. So let's talk then about these markets you are building. So tell me basically, like, who are the sellers? Because you've been doing this in the UK for a while now. I'm guessing like in the UK, you've got a pretty robust market going at this point. So a lot of experience there, more so than in the US so far. So just like when you set one of these things up, who is selling and what are they selling?
Well, this is the fundamental point. And before directly answering that, I think when we look at the US, the traditional model is the buyer, the utility, first of all specifies the technology type for a particular program. We're going to run a thermostat rush hour reward program. We're going to subsidize battery deployment. We're going to, do X, Y, and Z. And fundamentally, the marketplace model is so powerful because you don't need to do that. You basically can publish a need for megawatts or megawatt hours in a certain location for a certain duration, and then maybe some other technical parameters. Like I need this flexibility, this response to, last for 4 hours. And you publish that open request into the marketplace. And if you design the parameters right, you don't need to specify upfront which technologies you're going to allow in. And this is the aha moment that really kicked off in the UK, because we started scaling up the market in 2018. And back then, we were calling this the flexibility marketplace. No one was really using that term. But the flexibility market in the UK in 2018 was primarily gas peaking plants. And no one really, utility scale batteries was only just starting to evolve. Behind the meter residential flexibility wasn't really a thing. There was a future thing. But what we found immediately was, yes, there was a good level of participation from these traditional thermal assets, but there was these new emerging innovative players, these EV charging companies that were taking part. And guess what? The price point that they could bid in at was actually significantly lower, more competitive than some of these traditional assets. And all these new insights started emerging. When you open up the playing field and you don't sort of predetermine the outcome, you will be surprised.
I mean, the goal here, and this is exactly, as you say, this is exactly what clicked with me. The goal here is to make flexibility a fungible commodity, basically, so you can price it, right? And there's a million different ways to produce flexibility, but the whole point of a market is to sort of isolate, like, what is the valuable thing and how valuable is it? Like, I think maybe like more so than a lot of my ideological fellow travelers, I actually have a lot of respect for markets and like markets quite a bit. And this is precisely what they are good at, is price finding, value finding, right? Like how much is flexibility worth? Let's really find out by having the buyers of it compete to bid on it, rather than these isolated, like, I'm doing a thermostat thing and I'm doing a hot water heater thing. You know what I mean? So that's precisely, to me, the promise of it, is like we're narrowing in on what we actually want to buy and sell.
Yeah. And that's not to say there are challenges. There's only so much a market platform can deliver as value if the rules specified by the buyer aren't well thought through. And, that can mean lots of different things. But like if you design the rules for who can participate or the technical parameters, it can sometimes really, minimize participation to particular segments, and unnecessarily so. And so doing this right is not just about having the platform, which is a major part of the puzzle. It's also about engaging the buyers to also, have some level of standardization on the contract terms they're putting on.
Yeah.
And, having a think about, how do these things, in the UK, we talk about revenue or value stacking, and it's actually seen as a positive thing. I'm actually quite surprised on my travels in the US, where it's seen as it's a bit of a double accounting problem rather than actually something to be supportive of if done right. That's the key point. And so I think the two things come hand in hand. You need to have thoughtful attention to the market design, to the contract terms, and, no man is an island. If everyone does that by themselves, the value or the promise of the marketplace also can't deliver either. So that's what's really worked in the UK.
But to return to my question then, if you set it up this way, and if you sort of standardize the ask from buyers, they're just after, flexibility as such, however it is you want to produce it, who rises up to satisfy that demand? Like, what have you seen in the UK? Who is it that are the big players on the seller side? Is it mostly aggregators?
So it depends on the country and, the historical developments in the market. So in the UK, which has got a very well-developed aggregator model, most participation is via independent aggregators and retailer aggregators, with also independent project developers, and the occasional large industrial and commercial participant that might play directly on the marketplace.
I was going to ask about that. Is there like a minimum threshold here? Like, I'm assuming as a residential solar and battery owner, am not going to have enough energy to make it worth my while to directly participate in this. Is there a minimum?
So you have to be a company or an organization to have an account or membership on Piclo. But beyond that, this is a market rule set by a buyer when they set up a market. And we've had some instances where some of the more innovative distribution utilities in the UK have been testing out the limits and just putting like no minimum size and seeing what happens.
Interesting.
It's a sort of a balance. You don't want to be managing thousands of individual small players. You want some level of aggregation, but you also don't want just one large single super aggregator. You want some competition. So
right.
That's just a balance in the market. But just to mention, and this may be quite an interesting perspective for some players looking internationally, in Portugal, we see there isn't a well-developed aggregation history there, aggregation model, and there's a lot more direct participation on the market there. And therefore, if you're an aggregator, that could be quite an interesting market to go and have a look at.
Oh, right. Yeah. I guess one thing you could use these markets for is to sort of see where your services are needed.
Mm-hmm. Transparency drives so many beneficial things. Can I just say one interesting perspective that we get is, so one of the, in terms of how the platform works, if you're a flexibility owner or aggregator, you register your assets on the platform, and that's part of the journey to matching with opportunities. But as a byproduct, we're getting quite a lot of visibility into at a sort of country level what's going on, like what kind of assets and how that changes over time. And what we've seen in the UK, because we've had the market there running now coming up for 7 years, you can see the macro trends shifting over the years. So in the early years, 60, 70% of the assets by capacity were gas peakers. And now 60, 70% of the market by capacity is utility scale batteries.
Fascinating.
And you can see that shifting. But you know what's coming up now as the fastest growing by capacity, and that's behind the meter residential level flexibility.
Oh.
That is the fastest growing.
Via aggregators.
Via aggregators, yeah.
Interesting.
And that, in a big way, that's smart EVs, but it's also battery systems and other types of, residential assets. There's also the sort of next wave we see is flexible renewable assets. So renewable production sites also providing the flexibility. And these sort of so-called secondary assets.
Is that via curtailment?
Yeah, curtailment or other ways to smartly manage voltage and other parameters in the inverters. But I think we would class these together as sort of secondary assets. So like the primary purpose of an EV is not to provide flexibility to the grid, it's to move you around. You could even argue the primary purpose of a battery in a house is to soak up your excess solar. And you have these secondary assets, these demand response assets, that I think we're seeing the trends that they will be the majority of flexibility within 5 years in the UK.
That is so fascinating. I mean, honestly, this is one of the coolest things about finally setting up a market for all this stuff is just the informational, aspects. Like it's so hard to get your head around what are people doing, especially, the US is so huge and sprawling, just like what is going on the ground level flexibility wise. Like it's very hard to wrap your head around it. And so setting up a common market. So another question about sellers, how much vetting do you do? Does Piclo do? Like if I'm a buyer and I encounter a seller on the website, what assumptions can I make about due diligence? Like, should I just assume I need to do all the due diligence that I would do in a normal marketplace, or can I assume that you have done some basic scrutiny? Like, what do sellers go through to get on the site, I guess?
Yeah, so there's sort of a two-step process. Now, to get on the platform, we do a basic check. We have a conversation with them. We check they're a viable business. They are actually in the game of providing flexibility. And that's just so everyone on the platform registering assets, participating is a bona fide company in this space.
So there's been an actual touch.
Yeah.
Like a human being has reached out and touched each seller.
Yeah. But that's only just the base entry. Now, to enroll in any market, then there is a long list of KYC type checks that can be added by the buyer.
What's KYC?
Know your customer. Sorry, that might just be a UK acronym. I'm learning which acronyms have jumped across the pond and which don't. So essentially enrollment processes which the buyers can configure. What do they need to know? What documentation, what evidence of viability, and also on the technical side, in terms of their capability with their flexibility assets, etc. And what's pretty neat is we're also driving standardization on this. So actually providers can upload information once to the platform, and then that can be used kind of like a passport to all these different buyers.
This is another thing I was thinking. It must be such a relief for the sellers not to have to do this 50 times for every potential customer.
And then the final part of this, which is then, builds up over time, is we gather data on the actual performance, because, the part of the marketplace is we can facilitate the sending of the data signals. So whether that's dispatch or, after the fact, supporting on measurement verification.
Let's back up a minute. So so on the website, buyers and sellers can meet. They can come to an agreement. I'm wondering how much of this is on the website. Like, is it start to finish on the website? Like I can do the contract, I can sign everything, etc., all through the website?
That's the whole vision. Like you have a digital experience. Yeah.
And that goes all the way through. Like I find the flexibility I need, I sign the contract, I buy it, and then I can also operate it through the platform?
Yep.
And operate just means I send the signals when I need flexibility and
Yes.
they respond via the platform.
This is a key point. So we're an independent platform, trusted by both sides. And a lot of data is shared to the platform that is not in the public domain. And so there's a lot of trust here about us. And part of that agreement is we don't make decisions on behalf of either side. So we don't decide where a buy order comes from. We don't decide what a price to bid in, because we are essentially running the auction. We are running the market. But what we do is make sure that all the data sets that need to be transferred from either side at every step of the process is done in a streamlined way.
Yeah, just taking the soft costs off of all this.
Yeah.
Which were so built up. So is this just like for the US, is this just one giant pooled marketplace, all of the US? Like if I'm searching for flexibility, I can go to the website and I can search all 50 states, or are there discrete marketplaces?
So where we started out was discrete marketplaces, and this is, almost the traditional instinct of a utility is, it's their territory, it's their market, and we are, a vendor into that, helping them with procurement. And that worked well to a degree, but, you don't solve the fundamental issue, especially in the US, that, an aggregator covers all 50 states and just wants simple solutions. So we've now evolved, and this is what we launched in March earlier this year, was the open, we're calling the open marketplace, where all buyers, all sellers in one platform, and also, anyone can sign up now to becoming a buyer, not just utilities, which is really exciting.
Well, we're going to return to that later too. I'm very excited.
Yeah, exactly. So the key point here is, if you go onto piclo.com now, we've already started to map out or index all of the existing utility programs in the US. Now think of this as layer 0 on visibility. It's like, we're just like, this is what is already out there. We're already adding value to the ecosystem by sort of creating a global source of truth here. And, you can upload your assets on the platform and we can sort of help you understand which programs you may be eligible for. And then, and this is where we start building relationships with the buyers. They can then claim their accounts. They can essentially plug more into the platform and they can then get more value out. So more streamlined, enrollment. They can actually run procurements on the platform. They can, actively start buying. So there's sort of a choose your own adventure type experience of the platform. You can use as little or as much of it as you like.
Isn't it going to be the case that for, I guess, probably legal or regulatory reasons, most of what utilities buy is going to be in their own area, though, isn't it? I would presume whatever regulations they're under are telling them to improve their own grids. Do you know what I mean? Do you get have you seen a lot of cross-utility area buying and selling?
So the starting point for us was hyper-local flexibility. So this is feeder level congestion. I need to procure some downward demand in this particular set of street. Yeah. And that's the hardest kind of flexibility because it's so localized,
there's not, you don't have the liquidity of the bigger market.
So that's where we started, the hardest problem. And over time, we've gone to easier markets. And to give you a sense, one market that we created is a secondary market for the Great British Capacity Market, which operates, in a similar vein to sort of the PGM capacity market, subtle differences, but more or less the same. And if you do, if you want to do secondary trading, you have to know who the other counterparty is, agree a deal, and then lodge your trade in with the capacity market official platform. And we were like, it'd be great if you could just, people that had a need to do secondary trading, whether to offtake or take on contracts, they could advertise it on Piclo. So we just built it. And now we're sort of like the de facto secondary market for capacity market. And that's something which is not locational. You just have to be in Great Britain. And so that's the sort of, the equivalent that we're exploring in the US is with resource adequacy, starting off in California, but, this can apply in other places. And that would be KISO wide rather than on a particular utility or load serving entity territory.
Yeah, and it's interesting just thinking out into the future also, like once all the buyers and sellers get comfortable with this setup, whether you might see a little bit more kind of outside the box thinking in terms of those boundaries. So we talked about the sellers a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the buyers. Mostly for now, utilities. Maybe not in the future. We're going to get to that later. But for now, mostly utilities. What's the sort of pitch to utilities here? You have sort of like 3 areas where you're telling utilities this will make your life easier. Run through those just real quick.
Yeah. So I think when we look in the context where we started in the UK and Europe, there is in motion a major regulatory change across Europe happening in real time, where distribution utilities are being incentivized or essentially told that they have to start procuring flexibility rather than just de facto build more grid,
right,
where it makes sense. And this is a new capability for these organizations. They hadn't had the need to build up capacity, systems, processes to deal with it. So for the proposition in Europe is we go, well, we can help you run an end-to-end procurement process that complies with local and European regulations. We've done this in multiple countries, in Italy, Portugal, UK, Ireland. So we're the trusted platform. And we can help you recruit customers in, and we can, depending on choices you make, we can also help dispatch or settle those markets.
Can I pause for a second on recruitment? Because recruitment just means signing up people to participate, signing up people and businesses to participate in these markets. And this is sort of legendarily, like I was just the other day looking at one of these comparisons of the cost of rooftop solar in the US versus other countries versus Australia or something. There's a giant price difference. And it turns out that most of that price difference is customer acquisition, the laborious task of finding people and signing them up to these things. So if you can go to utilities and say, we can help streamline that piece of the puzzle, that alone is huge. But how do you do that with recruitment? Is it just by setting up this market and sort of sending out a signal to sellers saying, hey, there's an open market here, come on in? Or do you do something more proactive to go kind of recruit sellers at the beginning?
I mean, we definitely proactively recruit sellers. Targeting aggregators in the first case is the key. But I think the superpower that marketplaces have, which every utility program doesn't have right now, is network effects. So the first couple of sellers that you need to attract to the market are the hardest because you might only have one buyer. But you then have a cohort of active sellers. In the US, we started in New York and then expanded to Connecticut and now Massachusetts and then all across the states. That first cohort then starts to attract more buyers. Guess what? You now have a cohort of buyers, then you have more sellers. So you have a non-linear growth model here.
Right. You just got to kickstart the thing.
Yeah, you got to kickstart it, and then it can work. And there, this is the, coming back to the YouTube or, TikTok kind of analogy, it's the content producers on the site themselves, which are advertising themselves, not the platform that's doing all the advertising. Now, they do a little bit of advertising, but it's the parties, the ecosystem, the community themselves, because they want to get the outcomes for themselves using your platform. And if we start getting that right, then it really starts to work.
Yeah, you get a flywheel effect. So you're helping utilities find sellers and participants. You're giving them a standardized platform through which to procure these resources. And then you also mentioned grid modernization, which I think is just, there's lots of reasons why you might buy flexibility. You might do it because regulations tell you have to, like in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's also just grid issues, grid congestion, grid problems, which, as all Volts listeners know, DERs, targeted DERs are very good at solving. Have you seen lots of that happening on the platform, sort of not just sort of regulatory compliance, but actual like real-time solving of grid issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So the starting point is always, with a marketplace, you want to see if you get participation. You want to keep the systems as simple as possible. You would have a human at the utility logging into the platform, uploading files, using the user interface, doing things manually to get started, absolutely fine. But where you go in the journey, and we've seen this in the UK and other countries, is that's where you start. Within a couple of years, you kind of go, well, this seems to be working, but we got to scale this up by 1,000 times more feeder stations. This isn't, going to work. So it's all about APIs. And, we have API connection into multiple utility control room vendors. So we have announced partnerships with companies like GE Vernova, with Mitsubishi SGS, and some others that we haven't yet announced. And this is all about providing a streamlined sort of utility DERMS integration with marketplace type model. Because again, that's part of the standardization, the standardization across contracts, around market design, but also around the sort of systems for dispatch and measurement and verification. And when you get that working well, that's when you can do some magical things. That's when, with a few hours notice, you start seeing problems in a specific feeder that automatically sends a signal onto the marketplace and then reacts. And that's where we're starting to get in some countries, in Europe and in the UK. That's when it starts getting really exciting.
So the market solves these problems more or less automatically, makes them visible and makes the solutions available. And it runs itself at a certain point.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting debate, and there's always a big debate around, should this be tariff-driven response or contracted response? And what we find for highly localized, specific technical issues that you want to pay over the odds so that you definitely get a response, having a market type approach is the best outcome. Because if you were to have, just lump this all into tariffs, you would struggle to get the granularity without pissing off a couple of people that weren't expecting to have a huge spike in their cost or whatever. Yeah. And so for this highly targeted, getting the services you need on the feeder level, this automated marketplace model makes sense.
One of the things I was thinking about reading about this is, previous Volts pod on the subject of DCPs, distributed capacity procurements. The idea being that utilities should just proactively procure distributed energy resources, just like they procure any other kind of resource. They should sort of say like where and when they need the DERs and procure them themselves rather than sort of waiting for people to sign up one by one. And it just strikes me that having this platform makes that 1,000 times easier, just gives it a very standardized way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What about fraud and abuse? I mean, I'm sure this is the first question you get from everyone you talk to. Like, what are the sort of guardrails in place to prevent, like you read about like these carbon offset markets, people are signing up, claiming they're managing a forest, and turns out the forest doesn't exist, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So like everybody's antenna is up about this right now. So how do you think about fraud and abuse, and how do you think about your disposition towards enforcement? Hey there, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you about a new mattress or push a credit card on you. This isn't an ad. There are no ads on Volts. It is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'd like to ask for your support. I started Volts because we're all surrounded by depressing news about climate change and misinformation about clean energy, and it's never been more important to share the stories of the real people on the ground doing the real work of transition, and all the ingenuity and courage and public spirit they are bringing to it. People are hungry to hear these stories, to learn from and find inspiration in them. I've heard from people who changed majors or careers after hearing episodes of Volts. People using it in classrooms and community groups, even state legislators who have passed bills inspired by specific episodes. Sharing these stories matters. It makes a difference. If you have found value in it and want to help me continue doing it, I hope you will join the community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee a month. If you don't like subscriptions, you can make a one-time contribution, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or just tell a friend about Volts. I am grateful for any and all support. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. And now, back to the show. how do you think about fraud and abuse, and how do you think about your disposition towards enforcement?
Well, that's the right word, enforcement. Now, if you want to enforce, the first thing you need, and let's get to the different models for enforcement in a second, but the first thing you need is data. Do you know what's actually going on? Because if you don't know whether a forest is there or not, then how are you going to enforce? Now, the sweet thing about flexibility in particular is it's entirely data driven. Like you're signing a contract which outlines the methodology by which you are going to be assessed, and you have to provide evidence after the fact whether you delivered that or not. So you can check what's happening. And I think the point about the marketplace is it creates a lot of visibility here. Now, the second layer on here is there are two different ways to enforce, right? One is putting penalties in place, the contracts, which make it really expensive if they're not playing ball. The other approach is incentivizing. So we have the data, we have the historical performance data. Did you perform?
Right. So sellers have some way of sort of gaining reputation.
Gaining reputation.
Points. I don't know what stars. I don't know how you express it.
Yeah. And it's more complicated than an Uber rating, to be clear.
Right,
but that's the right mental model, right? So it's like you can create a market where you could have a minimal amount of minimum volume that you're allowed to be dispatched unless you've got a trading history or you have the right ratings. And then coming to the point about fraud or abuse, then that's just then layered in on this. And this becomes a data science problem. If you have, because I think that the reality is if you believe there are bad actors in the space, they will always try and find ways around the current rules and regulations to make money and to kind of bend the rules. This then becomes a data science problem because we have the data, we can see a lot about what's going on, and then we can make calls around, well, okay, we think that you're on the wrong side of the rules. You're not allowed to play in the marketplace anymore. There's no financial penalties there.
Right. So it would be a lot of work to cheat this, and you could probably only do it once.
Yeah, and the risk of cheating in a transparent marketplace that's checking whether you're cheating, and if it finds out, then you lose your major income source.
Right.
That will make people think twice. And that's how digital marketplaces deal with fraud and abuse. Is like if you break the rules, you get deplatformed, and that's an incentive in itself.
Well, let me ask a kind of a related question. I'm sort of wondering, and I guess this is if I'm thinking like a utility, like I need to make long-term contracts. I'm planning 3 years, 5 years, 10 years into the future. And if I'm looking at, like aggregated DERs, like, can I trust that these same homeowners will still be cooperating with this program in 10 years? So I wonder about how confident people are in long-term contracts in this kind of market. And if there's anything you can do kind of as the platform provider to de-risk these things somewhat, or is that just a matter for the market participants themselves?
Well, I think the first thing that we do offer is a secondary market, as I mentioned earlier. And we offer this for all of the markets. If someone is not able to provide the service that they're obligated to, they can find a similarly verified party, might need to be in the same location, that can provide that service. And that de-risks it to a significant degree. The other point is being thoughtful around how and when you rely on and flexibility versus grid hardening or other solutions. It also depends on if you need to rely on flexibility because you actually don't have any grid hardening solutions up your sleeve because there's no physical space or there's other challenges, permitting issues, etc. Then you might want to over procure and take a more of a stochastic approach. Like we expect, actually, again, it's a data analysis problem. On average, these types of technologies provide this level of certainty, this level of longevity, and we'll over procure by this much. So I think a lot of this comes down to, new kinds of capabilities that utilities should have are around data science and around understanding stochastic behaviors rather than purely deterministic, I've got a single power plant and I know what to do with it type mentality.
It does seem like market scale and liquidity will do some work to trim off those uncertainty tails a little bit over time. Like we'll just have more data about how things work long term.
And to my point about the trends we're seeing in the UK, and we see this everywhere at different stages, residential level flexibility is the best kind of flexibility by definition because it can solve problems at every level of the grid. Because you can add the capacity up, so it solves the immediate low voltage grid all the way up to the national grids. And also, and this is a really important point, there's an element of a postcode lottery if you are looking for locational flexibility. And if you're a single large, let's say, peaker plant or utility scale battery, if you're in the right location or not, there's a bit of a luck of the draw. However, we're seeing the trend being every single household having some sort of flexibility, whether it's EV or battery or a heat pump. And then the chances that there just will be loads of options of flexibility in that location and commercial industrial sites as well are just getting higher and higher every day.
There are houses almost everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the intro. Like, once you really start thinking about what we mean by distributed energy, it's everything out there, right? It's everything that people are using. Like, all of it, in theory, could be signed up and controlled. And if you think about the totality of it, you're talking real numbers. So I want to talk about the ACE program, but just briefly before we get there, just talk a little bit about where you are now in the US. Like, what's the sort of scale of DERs that are flowing through the market at this point? How many devices, how many utilities we're talking about, how many programs? Like, what's the sort of current scale and sort of like, what do you see in, 3 years?
Yeah, so we have 1 gigawatt or just over 1 gigawatt of DERs registered across 50 states. And, this is in the last 6 months. We look at the UK, we've got about 35 gigawatts registered, which is most of the market. So that gives you a sense. I think we will get to, my prediction is 10 gigawatts in the US by the end of this year.
Interesting. So just to give people listening a sense of scale, like a gigawatt is like a very large nuclear plant. So 35 gigawatts in the UK, that's a lot. That's 35 nuclear plants in the UK, if you can imagine that, in your brain. That's a substantial number.
The maximum demand in the summer in the UK is 50 gigawatts, or that order of magnitude. It goes up to about 70. So, that's a lot of flex.
Yeah.
That's available. It's actually quite amazing if you think about it.
Yeah. You're getting up where the flex numbers are like a substantial percentage of total demand, which is it's amazing what we're going to be able to do once we're accustomed to that.
Yeah, and that's not just all behind the meter or what you might classically in the US call VPP, virtual power plant type flexibility. That's also sort of thermal peaker plants and utility scale batteries as well as behind the meter stuff. So when we say flexibility, we mean all of that. We're not just talking about behind the meter stuff.
One thought that occurred, which I think is very interesting, is there's a lot of argument in the US these days about what is the cheapest source of flexibility or new capacity. Is it small, nimble gas plants, or is it solar and storage, et cetera, et cetera? Arguing. Finally, this just gives you a way to find out, to literally find out which of those is more valuable by how much people will pay for them. We can settle these arguments, if nothing else. It's delightful to me.
Yeah, and we believe in open data. So actually a lot of the historical bidding information is published on the platform. So you can actually see trends and understand this. And typically, we do see the outcome that the smaller the assets are, even if it's a large aggregator, the more competitive priced it is.
Interesting.
So it is something we do see.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun data coming out of this as it gets bigger. To me, one of the most exciting aspects of all this. So Volts listeners know at New York City Climate Week, I did a panel with Ari from Rewiring America. And Rewiring America's big idea that they put a paper out on is, look, we've got these hyperscalers, data centers, who desperately need to get on the grid. Like every day they don't get on the grid, they're losing enormous amounts of money. They're focused on speed to the grid. And to get on the grid, they need to free up some capacity. Takes forever to build a nuclear plant, takes forever to build a natural gas plant. What is the capacity that's available quickly? It is residential and business flexibility. That is where you have slack capacity laying around right now. So is there some way we could set up a system whereby these hyperscalers with all this money who are in such a hurry can pay for residential flexibility in order to get on the grid? Love that idea. We talked about it in the panel. And then like literally later in the week, you approached me. He's like, hey, I've got that. We're doing that. So let's talk about the ACE program then, which is just, as far as I can tell, what you're saying is, look, data centers, we've got this platform set up where we're selling flexibility. Come buy it. Is that the basic idea?
Absolutely. And again, all the benefits that we just mentioned at the beginning around not prescribing what they're buying.
Exactly.
They say we need this kind of, these hyperscalers are going to be in energization queues, and the different requirements of what they need to solve for are going to be different where they are, whether it's like they need generation or there's a transmission constraint. It will define a different system need that needs to be solved.
Right.
And what our platform allows them to do is not prescribe a solution. Essentially, the Rewiring America solution is neat, but it's one of lots of different alternatives. Maybe they just need to procure some thermal generation. Maybe they need to procure flexible behind the meter resources in a specific feeder on the network. Or maybe they just need to reduce the overall peak demand and, in subsidizing the build out of energy efficiency in households hits that. So this is the beauty of the marketplace model, is you have these potentially new buyers, these hyperscalers and data center operators, essentially publishing what they need in order to get energized faster. And it's open for everyone in the market to bid in and try and win these contracts, which could be highly lucrative. And this is the fundamental aha moment that we had, is the cost or the lost revenue of not building out, especially an AI data center, is absolutely enormous.
Yes, it's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. And therefore, if you allocate a fraction of that, even just conceptually, let's say a 3% of that, you could have the biggest pot of money for VPPs and flexibility that the country has ever known. It's just because the numbers are insane. And so this is why, we've been playing around with this model for years, looking at how you could, bring renewables on faster and offset curtailment arrangements and things. And it's always boiled down to, it's neat as a model, but the economics don't quite work. This has changed with specifically AI data centers, but all data centers. The economics are so crazy that now it makes sense that this would move the market. This would change things.
By having a data center that's not able to hook up to the grid, you're losing like $20 million a month or something ludicrous like that, something truly ludicrous like that. And as you say, those are amounts of money that would be transformative in the VPP, just like shaving off a tiny little bit of the money involved in data centers and putting it towards VPPs and DERs and flexibility would be such a huge pot of money from the perspective of those tiny little nascent markets.
Yeah, and there's a sort of economist view rather, which is really interesting around cost reflectivity, because another model is tariffs, but you have tariffs which aim to be cost reflective. Let's say you offer a data center a new tariff to
but you're guessing, right? You're guessing.
And there's a bit of a black box problem there.
Yes.
Where does that money actually go? Versus a pure play, the data center is paying for this outcome, which is faster energization, and that money is going straight to the flexibility, which then solves the system need. And that's why it's so exciting.
Yes, this is price discovery. This is what markets do, right? This is one of the basic features of markets, is they tell you what are these things worth, rather than having regulators have to guess how much they're worth. So As I'm looking at this program, I mean, you sort of frame it as a new program, but as far as I can tell, like this would just be data centers using your platform, right? Like you're not talking about building a separate thing for data centers, are you? Or a special market for data centers? This is just about like data centers coming into your marketplace and using it mainly, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit too early to name names, but we're talking with a number of independent data center operators, hyperscalers who are very excited by this model.
Yeah.
And, could use it tomorrow. Like they could sign up, publish a need.
Another good thing about markets is you can just do it and you don't have to wait on a regulator, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't they doing this already? Like is there anything you need to do to make it available to them? Or is this just a matter of like them waking up to the opportunity and coming to you?
I think if you look at data centers and flexibility in the last 6-9 months, it's really become one of the most talked about, exciting conversations in the industry.
Yeah.
And it's mainly focused around on-site flexibility and very exciting flexible compute and all of that. And that's all good stuff. But what we found is what's amazing, at the same time we announced ACE a couple of weeks ago.
Which, just quickly, what does it stand for?
Accelerated Community Energy. Around that time, like the week before and a few days later, 2 other parties announced similar models. And now we're starting to hear this model being talked about by lots of different parties. So yeah. I think there's a time and a place, and we sort of, serendipity or accidentally, we announced it at right bang in the middle of when people are talking about it. So I do think this is, we're getting some insights from hyperscalers going, well, the most precious commodity for them on site is space. So they don't want to be building out huge amounts of on-site DER flexibility if they don't need to. And because the space is such a premium, because the earning potential that they have with these AI racks is so high that if they can pay to solve this problem.
But if you're paying for flexibility on the grid where the data center is located, it amounts to the same thing, basically, doesn't it?
It amounts to the same thing, but you get more because you can have the same benefits as if it was situated on site. And I think there should be still, to be clear, I think some on-site flexibility is a great idea for resiliency and other use cases. But if you put it on the grid, you can start solving other problems on the grid which also exist, and whether these are locational issues or otherwise. So it's a really neat way of solving what we're calling the missing money problem in flexibility, where having to go to regulators to negotiate how to increase budgets for flexibility with the impact on rising costs to ratepayers is a difficult discussion. And I think that's a lot of places is where flexibility gets stuck in the mud. If you can take out the cost equation, and then you get these utilities almost get flexibility for free.
Yeah, like utilities are sort of legendarily, everybody knows this, legendarily conservative for good reason. So this just seems like a lot for them to process, this sort of third-party platform market where hyperscalers are paying for flexibility, because what needs to happen at the end of that is the utility saying, okay, this flexibility counts, thus we will let you onto the grid, right? So the utility is still at the center of this. I'm wondering, like, are utilities comfortable with this, with the market, with the dynamic, with all of this? Like, what has been their reaction when you talk to them about this idea?
Generally, a lot of excitement. When they first hear about it, they kind of like, well, what does this all mean? But then they kind of go, oh, we're actually doing that in a different way already. But, the only difference is they had to go to the regulator to negotiate a budget for subsidizing the build out of batteries or whatever. And fundamentally, that comes down to it, is the only difference is where the money comes from. And when it comes to like flexibility, the really key thing for us is we have the track record. We, for the last 7 years, have been working with utilities across the US, across the world. This isn't a new startup that's just come up with an idea. We have the track record and are trusted by utilities.
So utilities believe that the flexibility is real. It's not completely new to them. They're somewhat familiar with the product.
Yeah, and there's different ways. Again, this is why it's so neat. Like it could be that what's happening is you're essentially subsidizing the build out of flexibility into existing programs. So they're using their existing tools to dispatch and measure and all of that. It could be that this is just the data center procuring generation capacity that they then enter into wholesale markets or, get accredited in other ways. The beauty of this is the marketplace allows you to solve the problems you need to solve to get energized fast and present it to all the different stakeholders you present to, and not in the first instance sort of prescribe the solution.
Again, this is all just basic market stuff. Like anytime you can move something like this into a market, you just get clarity, right? You get clarity about what's available. You get clarity about what the value of it is. You get clarity about the timing and all of that. All of this will be available.
And you get scale, like especially the hyperscalers. They're like, oh, and this is global. Yeah, we can work everywhere in the world. And this then starts to get pretty interesting.
The amounts of power they're talking about are gargantuan in some cases. So I'm sort of curious, like whether their initial reaction was, "This is beans," like this is small beans here. We need big stuff, and you're out there selling little baskets of small stuff. I wonder if you ran into any of that. People have trouble wrapping their heads around the idea of distributed stuff adding up to something substantial. Do you know what I mean?
But like again, the level of how distributed it is we're agnostic, whether it's residential level or, we've got 100 megawatt plus scale, generation and storage devices on the marketplace. So like some of it's not small. And I think the first reaction we get is, oh, we're already kind of doing something like this. And then they realize that, oh, yeah, they were thinking about it in a small fragmented way. And now they can do it at scale. That's the aha moment they have.
So what would be required for this to get going? Like they could just come start buying tomorrow, these hyperscalers, like the door is open. Are we waiting for anything?
Yeah, we are with a number of parties and we're always open to more parties we're essentially exploring where we can get the first proof of concept, which region in the US or in the UK that we're going to get this up and running. The utility sector always runs on precedence. So you need one example to get over the line and then is open the floodgates. So that's the focus is, we're working with a couple of parties. We want to get one of these over the line. And then I reckon we're going to open the floodgates sort of moment.
Yeah, that's going to be an amazing transformation of a bunch of different things. So when you look ahead at that moment, that floodgate moment, like what kind of scale are we talking about here? Like, I mean, I think you ran some of these numbers. If you peel off 3%, this is somewhat arbitrary, but if you peel off 3% of the money that's flying around in the data center world, that data center investment, what would that amount to in the flexibility world and the VPP world?
So again, every week you hear an increased forecast of how many gigawatts of data centers we're getting. But even if you took a highly conservative a mere 100 gigawatts, 3% at current cost would bring in $40 billion in new revenues for VPPs, which, it's like it would treble the size of the market.
Yeah.
And that's just insane, really.
That is. That will be quite something to see. So we're on the verge here. This is kind of what just to wrap it up, what I want to get across here, on the verge of hyperscalers, rather than just sitting on their hands frustrated or indulging in these SMR dreams, can just start spending money and getting flexibility immediately. I think once a few of them do that, once they see that's possible, you're just going to get an enormous, and this is what the people in the DER world and the flexibility world have been waiting for. Just like, where is the money? Where is the money for scale? This could unlock that. So it's going to be super exciting to watch that unfold. As a sort of final question here, even though you've been doing this for a while, I think, especially like in the US, this market still counts as nascent. This is very early days for setting up this marketplace. We just have sort of like early adopters coming in. And, one of the cool things about markets is, as sort of like networked systems, they have emergent effects, like all sorts of crazy things happen with scale that you can't necessarily predict. So I'm just wondering, like, two-parted question. One is, are there major improvements in your platform and the operation of this thing that you have in mind that are waiting for more money, more scale? Like, do you have a sort of roadmap of improvements? And then sort of like beyond that, like once this gets really big, I'm wondering if you have any sort of speculation about what kind of emergent effects we might see, how this might change big macro trends.
Wow.
That's a lot for our last question.
That's a lot for last question. I think
and I know it's dinner time there too.
Yeah. I think you have to be living under a rock not to see the potential of AI in transforming everyone's product roadmap. There's a real interesting promise here, where things which don't currently scale because you need teams of thousands of people could scale in the future.
That's part of why I was asking about whether you reach out to sellers individually. I'm wondering sort of like how high touch, how sort of manual some parts of this remain, and whether those parts could sort of be kind of automated over time.
Exactly. So, the platform itself, we're always investing in, we always forecast next year, if it's 10x more volume than last year, we try and get ready for 100x sort of thing. So there's always a sort of investing for scale on the fundamental platform and plumbing. But then in terms of like just rethinking how the market can work in an age of AI is super exciting. Like, how's this going to play out? And no one has an answer to this, but like, what happens if every business has its AI agent acting on its behalf, trying to secure the best deals, doing things like bidding into flex markets?
An AI energy trader, an in-house.
Yeah, we may see an explosion in the number of participants in the market, and these sort of virtual participants acting directly on behalf of businesses and people. I'd say that's where I'd put my money on being probably the most disruptive thing coming.
Interesting.
And that, again, we're well placed to support and scale that if it does arrive.
Yeah, and I've always said this from the beginning, like what is really going to get DER markets to really take off is just automation. Like there's so much hands-on stuff still. Like you read about these demand response programs, even today, still so many of them are like, we sent an email to 1,000 people and asked them to go turn a knob somewhere. Like I think all of that stuff is eventually going to be automated. Everything's going to be automated eventually. And that I think is going to be huge for scale. So like, I wonder if you have any thoughts about like the ultimate scale of this market. Like, do you think, flexibility that you can procure, distributed flexibility, is eventually going to be like equal in scale to, I don't know, the natural gas electricity market? Or like, how big of a player could this thing be? Do you have any sort of glittering, 5-year, 10-year dreams?
The way I describe it is, or you could either describe it as flexibility is eating the world, or everything becomes flexibility. You look at
right.
renewable power trading, every renewable generator is becoming a hybrid site. It's all morphing together into one. And this is how this is our vision, when we set up the marketplace in the first case was, we could see this decentralized energy transition emerging. And the first thing that gets impacted is the assets themselves. And that's, you've gone from big assets down to small assets. But the systems for managing the markets, the system operation is not immune to change. And we need new kinds of markets for this decentralized world, new kinds of system operation. And that's what we built. That's what we set out to build, is a new kind of market designed for this decentralized world. So the long-term vision is this is beyond flexibility. This is just the new market layer for the energy world.
Yeah, I mean, when you imagine in the future, everybody talks about data centers, but of course, transportation is electrifying, residential is electrifying, industry over somewhat of a longer term is electrifying, and everything that electrifies becomes a flexibility asset sort of automatically. Like it comes with electricity. So then you're talking about transportation, industry, residential, all of that being in a single pooled market. And that is just mind-blowing to imagine. The level of flexibility available once everything is pooled together. And as we were saying, flexibility becomes sort of this fungible commodity. That boggles the mind to contemplate, for me at least. James, this has been a thrill, as I expected. I'm so glad you're doing this. As I said, like the minute you told me, I was like, well, why aren't 100 people doing this? Why isn't everybody doing this? And it does seem like there's going to be a first mover advantage. Do you think there's going to be multiple of these markets, or do you think the logic of this moves eventually toward one giant market?
I think you're going to have a handful. You look at other market or platform plays, there's always a dominant one and a second place and a longer tail. But it's not a construct where the market can accept hundreds of them. It just doesn't work.
Right. Like an eBay and an Etsy, maybe. To our analogy. All right. Thank you, James. Thanks for staying up late and talking about this. This is super fascinating. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Volts. It takes a village to make this podcast work. Shout out especially to my super producer, Kyle McDonald, who makes me and my guests sound smart every week. And it is all supported entirely by listeners like you. So if you value conversations like this, please consider joining our community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf, or leaving a nice review, or telling a friend about Volts, or all three. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.